On the morning of Sunday, December 29, 2024, a Jeju Air Boeing 737-800 prepared to land at South Korea's Muan International Airport. But what began as a routine flight from Bangkok ended in one of the deadliest air disasters in South Korea since 1997. The flight, carrying 181 people, skidded off the runway and burst into flames, killing 179 of the 181 people on board. This is the story of the worst plane crash in South Korean history, the Jeju Air Boeing 737-800 disaster. The Jeju Air flight in question was a routine service from Bangkok's Suvarnabhumi Airport to Muan International Airport in South Korea. It was late evening on December 28, 2024, when the Boeing 737-800 departed Bangkok, carrying 175 passengers and 6 crew members. The passengers included families returning from holiday vacations, business travelers, and even a few young children. For most on board, it was meant to be an ordinary flight home after a festive season abroad. The aircraft was scheduled to arrive at Muan International Airport early on December 29th. Weather conditions were reported as less than ideal, with reduced visibility and light rainfall. Despite this, the flight proceeded without major incident until the final moments of its approach. As Jeju Air Flight 123 approached Muan International Airport on the morning of December 29, 2024, the conditions became challenging. Light rain and reduced visibility added complexity to what should have been a routine landing. Moments before the descent, the air traffic controller issued a bird strike warning, advising the pilot of potential hazards in the area and directing the pilots to land elsewhere. However, acknowledging the warning, the crew continued with their approach. Soon after, the pilot transmitted a distress signal, reporting a critical situation on board. Preliminary reports suggest that a bird strike may have caused significant damage to one or more of the plane's systems, including the engines or hydraulics responsible for deploying the landing gear. At 7:45 a.m. on December 29, 2024, the Jeju Air Boeing 737-800 made its final descent toward Muan International Airport. As the aircraft approached the runway, unfortunately, it became clear that the landing gear had failed to deploy, forcing the plane into a belly landing. As the 737-800 made contact with the wet runway, sparks and debris flew from the fuselage. Despite the pilot's efforts to control the aircraft, it skidded at high speed, unable to decelerate effectively. The plane overshot the runway and collided with a concrete wall at the edge of the airport's buffer zone at exactly 7:47 a.m. The impact was catastrophic. Upon striking the concrete wall, the aircraft's fuel tanks ruptured, igniting a massive fire that engulfed most of the fuselage within seconds. Only the tail section remained somewhat intact, shielding the 2 crew members who would later be rescued. The rest of the plane was reduced to complete near unidentifiable wreckage. Emergency teams of over 1,500 personnel were deployed on site within minutes, but the intensity of the flames and the destruction they encountered made rescue efforts nearly impossible. For the 179 passengers and crew trapped inside, the odds of survival were equally devastatingly slim. Nevertheless, firefighters battled the flames consuming the wreckage, while paramedics and police worked tirelessly to assist in recovery operations. Amid the wreckage, 2 crew members were discovered alive in the tail section. The survivors, a man and a woman in their 20s, were quickly transported to hospitals of their preference in Seoul for treatment. While their injuries were severe, they were reported as not life-threatening. Their accounts would later become critical to understanding the final moments of the flight. Back at the airport, the mood was filled with grief and despair. Hundreds of family members gathered, waiting to hear the news about their loved ones. Government officials provided updates every hour, confirming the grim toll. 179 of the 181 on board had perished. By the end of the day, only 65 of the deceased had been positively identified. The painstaking task of identification would continue in the days that followed, adding to the anguish of the waiting families. The airline CEO issued a public apology immediately, bowing deeply during a televised statement. He expressed condolences to the victims' families and pledged full cooperation with the ongoing investigation. However, his refusal to answer journalists' questions at the press conference drew criticism, with many questioning the airline's transparency and handling of the tragedy. In the days that followed, the crash site remained a hub of activity as recovery teams searched for remains and investigators began piecing together the cause of the disaster. Temporary mortuaries were established nearby to house the remains, and families were offered support in arranging funeral services. Railway services were also provided to help relatives travel to and from the site. As the nation mourned, South Korea's acting president declared a week of national mourning and designated the crash as a special disaster. This declaration ensured that government resources would be prioritized to assist the bereaved families and manage the aftermath of the tragedy. As the flames at Muan International Airport were extinguished, the focus shifted to uncovering the cause of the disaster. South Korea's aviation authorities launched an immediate investigation, joined by the National Transportation Safety Board from the United States, as the aircraft involved was a Boeing 737-800. The black box and the cockpit voice recorder were recovered from the tail section of the wreckage. Initial reports suggested that the devices were intact, providing investigators with hope for detailed insights into the moments leading up to the crash. Preliminary findings pointed to a bird strike as a potential factor. As mentioned earlier, air traffic controllers had issued a bird strike warning just minutes before the plane's approach. Shortly after, the pilot sent out a distress signal, reporting an urgent situation. Evidence from the wreckage indicated possible damage to the aircraft's engines and hydraulics, potentially preventing the deployment of the landing gear. Investigators also noted the absence of key safety features at the Muan International Airport, including adequate runway overrun zones, which could have mitigated the impact of such an accident. The role of weather conditions was also scrutinized. Light rainfall and reduced visibility may have compounded the crew's challenges, limiting their ability to adapt to the unfolding emergency. As public pressure mounted, Jeju Air came under intense scrutiny for its operational protocols and safety measures. Critics questioned the adequacy of the airline's training programs and the decision to proceed with the flight despite adverse conditions. The airline's prior safety record, although generally strong, was not enough to shield it from these concerns. The investigation emphasized systematic issues in aviation safety. It highlighted the need for stronger regulations around bird strike mitigation, improved airport infrastructure, and enhanced pilot training for emergency scenarios. Authorities vowed to implement sweeping challenges to prevent a similar tragedy from occurring in the future. Though the final report is not immediately available as this is still a developing story, the preliminary findings paint a harrowing picture of how a series of unfortunate events culminated in South Korea's worst aviation disaster in decades. The nation, meanwhile, awaits answers, demanding accountability and assurance that such a catastrophe will not be repeated. But what do you think? Could the airline or authorities have done more to prevent this tragedy? Why exactly did the pilot not follow the air traffic controller's instruction to land elsewhere? What changes do you believe are necessary to make aviation even safer? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story interesting, please don't hesitate to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for a more in-depth coverage of aviation stories. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when our next video drops. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.